Hey everybody, welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So as you know, we have followed the Andrew Mitchell trial out of Ohio. This was the former vice unit officer who was just acquitted by a jury of murder and manslaughter charges in the death of a 23-year-old woman named Donna Castleberry. The allegation was that Mitchell, while acting undercover in a prostitution bust, actually arrested Castleberry. In fact, picked her up, trapped her in his car. He didn't have his police badge or radio on him, so it was a question of whether she actually believed him to be a police officer. There was a violent interaction in his vehicle. She cut him, and he ended up shooting her. Now, he took the stand in his second trial. First one ended in a mistrial. He claimed self-defense, and as I mentioned, the jury found him not guilty. But that is not the end of his troubles. In fact, he still faces federal charges for allegedly forcing women into sex acts in exchange for their freedom and also lying to authorities. I gotta tell you, it's a really fascinating case. But what you may not know is that the Ohio Vice Squad that Mitchell was a part of, which has since been disbanded, has a connection to a very notable public figure, someone who has been following the Mitchell case, someone that I'd like to bring in right now, none other than actress and director Stormy Daniels. Stormy, welcome to Law and Crime. So good to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, for people who don't know, your interaction with the Ohio Vice Squad came back a few years ago when you were arrested by their officers at a Columbus strip club for illegally touching patrons. They actually charged you at the time with a 10-year-old state law. It was called Ohio's Community Defense Act. If you can, briefly explain what happened to you that night.
Okay. I was in town to feature dance at the strip club in Ohio. I have danced in Ohio probably more than any other state. Columbus especially, I've been going there for years. I'm very familiar with the law. I know that often when you go to a club and perform, if you are not an actual employee of the club, the laws or rules are slightly different. That being said, I went on stage, I did my show. I knew all the regulations and the rules. And while I was on stage, there was officers undercover in the club, unbeknownst to me, two of which were sitting in the front row, acting as a couple. They were making out, they were kissing, pretending to be very excited by my show. The male was putting dollars in the woman's bra, like between her breast and in her mouth, and I leaned over and I took the tips, and then continued my show. There was no issue. After my show, I went back to my tour bus, got changed, went inside to do autographs and photos with fans, and these same undercover officers then stood in line and purchased adult DVDs for me, signed photographs, took pictures, told me that my show was great. They were big fans, all these things. And after that, I went back to my bus only to have them come and knock on the door and tell me that I was under arrest. And they had called, tons of police cars, one of the big wagons that they usually haul off like drunk drivers in, just making a huge spectacle of it. And I argued with them that I had not broken the law. They arrested me. Now, the law that I allegedly broke, normally it just comes with a ticket. I've been in the adult business for many, many years, performed at a lot of clubs and functions, have gotten warnings before, way in the past, and I've had friends that have had similar things happen to them, and they just write you they just write you a ticket. It's normally like a $500 fine. It's never something that they handcuff you, put you in a van, drive you to the police station, fingerprint you, strip off all your clothes, search you. They took pictures of my tattoos. They took my diamond earrings that I did not get back, and put me in a cell. It was really excessive, I felt like at the time. Also, when we got to the police station, they left me handcuffed in the vehicle for hours. When I complained that one of my cuffs was too tight, they came in and actually tightened it. I had bruises on my wrist. I lost, feeling in my fingers. It just seemed really excessive for a non-violent crime. I didn't resist arrest. I was completely respectful, although confused. And I knew that it was wrong. At the moment, I gave them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they just didn't know, which is pretty ironic that I knew the law better than the arresting officers of the Vice Squad. But the whole thing seemed very set up and orchestrated and almost, I mean, I would say entrapment. And then we found out later that I was correct. I had not broken any laws. It was a false arrest.
Right.
And these vice officers had actually planned to arrest me and set me up weeks before I even got into town. Facebook messages and things like that were recovered, talking about how they were big Trump supporters and they were going to make an example out of me. I think one of the emails even said, "We're going to get her tonight," and then we got her, and all these things. Obviously, the next day I was bailed out and called my attorneys, and the charges were dropped.
Let's talk about it. So your case was dropped. One of the main reasons is because under Ohio's law against this physical contact between strippers and customers, it usually only applies to someone who regularly performs at a club. In your case, it was your first appearance at the Sirens Club. And then we find out that these officers, I mean, you just described it, but these officers engaged in an improper investigation. From failing to file proper paperwork justifying your arrest, to lying to internal affairs, to failing to record working hours. I mean, the spotlight was put on them. I talked about how it was disbanded. When you found out, I mean, you yourself, you're experiencing this, you're seeing something's off. You said it's excessive, but when you find out that what you're believing actually turns out to be true, and these are officers who were breaking protocol, what did you think about that?
I mean, it was disgusting and disappointing and honestly quite terrifying. I was a big enough name and a public figure, being in the news and everywhere at the time, that it's got a lot of attention. And I mean, it's just shocking that someone could be so abusive of power. And honestly, at the time, I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, like, what if I wasn't famous? What if I didn't have this team with me? What if, I was actually being filmed for a documentary at the time, which is coming out later this year. So my whole thing is caught on film by my crew. They also had filmed my show. They know what I had done. And, a regular girl working in that kind of situation wouldn't have those things available to them. The night that I was arrested, they also arrested 2 other girls who also had not done anything wrong, who were absolutely terrified and sobbing. They had separated us as well. They had those ladies in a different car. And one of them was crying, and she was saying, like, the officer was like telling her things like, now your family's gonna know, your life is ruined.
Yeah.
As you know, when you are arrested, they print your name in the paper, and those girls' families, and they were very young ladies, their families didn't know what they did for a living. And when you print a performer, a sex worker's legal name in the paper, not only are you doing damage to their family and their social situation, but now people know how to find them, stalkers.
And that's the point that I'm glad you brought up, because this unit was disbanded. Do you think if it wasn't for what happened to you, it would still be around? I mean, do you think the scrutiny that they came under after arresting you is the reason that they were disbanded?
I don't know if it was completely because of me, but I know that I had a big part in it. They were so terrible and doing so many awful illegal things that I would hope by now they would have been. But I definitely think that I was a huge part of starting, a more serious investigation against them and expediting their disbandment for sure. When we went back and did mediation and things like that, we ended up settling my case and not going to trial. But part of the thing I was so stuck on with my attorneys was that the city of Columbus, not let it go. They made a promise that they would investigate and hold those officers accountable. And then we found out that they were actually investigated and charged, and the vice unit was disbanded.
Yeah, and Stephen Rosser, who was one of the arresting officers, I'm not sure if you know what happened to him. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison by a federal judge on charges he conspired to violate the civil rights of another individual. So that's somebody that was part of the arresting team. The thing that I'm always interested in when I read about this case is you had just mentioned it was politically motivated. They did do an internal police review, and they said while everything was improper, they didn't find that it was planned ahead of time or was politically motivated. What did you think of that report?
I think it's inaccurate. I think that the messages and things they were saying back and forth before I even got into town is completely indicative that that's not the case, that it was politically motivated, or they wanted to make an example. I don't know if it was because of politics or just because I was a woman, and I'm not really sure. But keep in mind, I was there and they were gleefully like congratulating each other when they had me in cuffs. They had called, there were so many people, officers there just to arrest little old me who wasn't causing any sort of disturbance. They came with like ski mats, like face coverings. And I mean, you would have thought that I was, a mob raid. It was just crazy. And I mean, police lights, they were definitely making an example or a show out of the whole thing.
Yeah, and